I had been tutoring for years, but nothing could prepare me for the day when my student Ben showed up at my door unannounced. I was used to him showing up at my house for our regular sessions, but this time there was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he stood there, shifting nervously on my doorstep, his usual bright smile replaced by an almost unreadable expression. "Hi, Miss Dawson," he said softly, his voice tinged with hesitation. "Ben, what's going on? Is everything okay?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. I wasn't sure why, but I felt a strange sense of unease as I closed the door behind him. It wasn't like Ben to be so quiet. Usually he was full of stories about school and his friends, but today he seemed distant. I led him to the living room where we always worked, trying to ease the tension. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, attempting to break the silence. "Coffee? Tea?" He nodded slowly. "Sure, I'll have a coffee." "Thanks." I turned to make it, but the air between us felt heavier, thicker somehow. As I poured the coffee, I couldn't help but glance at Ben. There was something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. But before I could ask him what was on his mind, he spoke. "Ms. Dawson, I've been thinking about something for a while," he said, his words coming out more vulnerable than I expected. I wanted to tell you, but wasn't sure how." I set the cup down in front of him and sat beside him, giving him space but also offering my full attention. "What is it, Ben? You know you can tell me anything." He swallowed hard, then looked at me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about you. A lot, actually. More than I should." I wasn't sure how to respond. I'd never thought of him in that way, but there was an undeniable shift in the room. His words were innocent enough, but the way he said them made me feel something stir inside of me. I knew I needed to maintain professionalism, but I also couldn't ignore the subtle connection that had begun to form between us. "I'm your teacher, Ben," I said softly, my voice steady but my heart racing. "You know this can't go beyond tutoring. We're here to focus on your studies, nothing more." He nodded quickly, almost apologetically. "I know, Miss Dawson. I had to say it." And just like that, the air between us seemed to lighten again, but the tension was still there, lingering like a shadow. We continued with the lesson, but neither of us could shake the weight of the unspoken words. The next few sessions felt different. Ben's usual eagerness to learn had waned, replaced by a quiet intensity. It was as though he was trying to navigate some internal conflict, unsure whether to push the boundaries we had established or retreat to a safer distance. I couldn't help but feel the same pull, a magnetic connection that I didn't know how to process. One evening, as we were finishing up, I asked him, "How's everything going outside of school, Ben? Is everything okay?" He hesitated, his eyes shifting toward the window, as if searching for the right words. "It's complicated," he admitted. "Things at home aren't great. My parents are going through a rough patch, and I don't know how to deal with it." My heart ached for him. I had known about his family's struggles, but hearing it from him like this felt different. There was a vulnerability in his voice that made me want to reach out and offer comfort, but I knew I had to keep a distance. I couldn't let my emotions get in the way of our tutoring. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ben," I said gently. "But you don't have to deal with it alone. You have people who care about you, and I'm here for you, okay?" He nodded, but I could see the sadness lingering in his eyes. Then he surprised me. Without a word, he reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and desperate. "I just needed someone to talk to," he whispered. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I felt the weight of his touch, the warmth of his hand in mine, and I couldn't help but wonder if he was searching for something more than just comfort. There was an unspoken tension between us, a line that neither of us dared to cross, but it was becoming harder to ignore. I gently pulled my hand away, my heart pounding. "Ben, we can't," I began, but he stopped me with a soft plea. "I know," he said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability and uncertainty there. It was hard not to feel a deep sympathy for him, but I had to remind myself of the boundaries. I was his teacher, and he was my student. That was all this could be. The weeks passed, and the emotional distance between Ben and me grew. Our sessions remained focused on his schoolwork, but the unsaid words between us continued to haunt me. I'd often found myself reflecting on that moment, the touch of his hand, the intensity in his eyes, and I couldn't help but question what it all meant. Was I overreacting? Was I reading too much into something innocent? One afternoon, Ben arrived at my house for our usual session, but there was something different about him. He seemed calmer, more at peace, like he had resolved whatever inner turmoil had been bothering him. "Miss Dawson," he began, his voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, and I want to apologize." I looked at him, surprised by his maturity. "Ben, there's nothing to apologize for. We both knew where the boundaries were, and we respected them." He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "I'm glad we can move past that. I realized that I've been projecting my emotions onto you, because I didn't know who else to turn to. I've been so confused about everything. About my family, about myself." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride in him. It was clear that Ben had grown in ways that went beyond his academic achievements. "I'm proud of you, Ben. You're learning to navigate difficult emotions, and that's not easy." He looked at me, his expression sincere. "Thank you for being there for me, even when it was hard." As I watched him leave that day, I felt a sense of closure. The tension that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by a mutual respect and understanding. We had both grown through this experience, and it had deepened our connection, not in a romantic way, but in a way that was more meaningful. I realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to personal growth. And although this chapter had been filled with tension and confusion, it had ultimately taught me the importance of boundaries, respect, and understanding.